Never thought I'd be the guy spying on his own wife, but there I was, hidden cameras and all. You see, it started with a text message, the kind that turns your world upside down. A simple, I miss you, from a number that wasn't mine. My wife, always careful, slipped up this time. It felt like a sucker punch, right in the gut. I was boiling over, mind racing with betrayal. Without thinking twice, I rigged our house with, yeah, I know, it sounds extreme, but you don't think straight when your heart's been trashed. I needed proof, something solid to confront her with. Next up, the big show. I called her family over for the weekend. Family reunion, I said. They bought it, everyone cheerful and unsuspecting. My wife. She was the picture of innocence. That stung the most. Dinner time was a blast, until it wasn't. Midway through, I grabbed the remote and switched on the TV. There it was, the grand reveal, footage of her and Mr. Wonderful, all cozy and loving. Like watching a car crash in slow motion, I tell y'all. The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Her dad, the retired judge with that no-nonsense look, his face crumpled in disbelief. The man spent his life upholding the law, and here was his daughter, breaking the rules of her mom, a staunch believer in marital sanctity, looked like she'd seen a ghost. Her brother, well, he couldn't even sit still, pacing around like a caged animal. Disgust, shame, shock, it was all there, written on their faces. Me? I was a mix of anger, vindication, and this deep, hollow sadness. It's one thing suspecting your wife's cheating. It's another watching her family's hearts break right along with yours. That image, her on the screen, oblivious to the pain she was about to cause, it'll stick with me forever. The aftermath was a storm of yelling, crying, and accusations. Her dad, he couldn't even look at her. Said something about betraying the family name. Her mom was in tears, asking why over and over. And her brother, man, he was livid, like he wanted to punch something. Probably me for airing their dirty laundry. My wife. She was a mess, sobbing, begging for forgiveness, trying to explain. But what's there to explain when you're caught red-handed? I just sat there, watching the chaos, feeling like I was in some twisted reality show. Yeah, it was cruel. Maybe too cruel. But in that moment, all I could think about was the lie my life had become. And her family. They deserved to know the truth, no matter how ugly. The morning after the big reveal, the house felt like a graveyard, silent, heavy with regret. My wife, her eyes puffy from crying, tried to talk to her mom. But let me tell you, her mom, a lady who's all about family honor and tradition, wouldn't have any of it. She just sat there, stone-faced, looking straight through her own daughter. "You've brought shame to us," she said, voice cold as ice. The words cut deep. You could see it in my wife's eyes. Her brother, this big guy who used to idolize her, couldn't even bear to be in the same room. He kept shooting these angry glances before finally storming out. He slammed the door so hard, the whole house shook. My wife crumpled right there, sobbing like a child. It was a mess, a real-life drama unfolding right in my living room. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, decision made. First thing next morning, I went down to the courthouse and filed for divorce. Irrefutable evidence of adultery, the form read. Never thought I'd tick that box. It was surreal, signing those papers, like closing the book on a chapter of my life. Word travels fast in small towns, and ours is no exception. By noon, everyone knew. Whispers at the grocery store, stares at the gas station, you name it. Our once quiet life became the town's hottest gossip. I heard bits and pieces, can you believe it? And never saw it coming. Yeah, join the club. The real kicker came a few days later. I was picking up some stuff at the supermarket when I saw it go down. The affair partner's wife, a short, fiery woman, confronted my wife right there between the aisles. It was like watching a showdown in a Wild West movie, only with shopping carts and canned goods. "You homewrecker," she yelled, jabbing a finger in my wife's face. My wife, looking like a deer in headlights, just stood there, taking the verbal beating. People gathered, phones out, recording every second. It was humiliating, sure, but part of me thought, well, What did you expect? After that, things just spiraled. My wife, once a respected member of the community, turned into this pariah. Friends avoided her. Neighbors whispered behind her back. She'd go out and come back looking more defeated each time. It was like watching someone get slowly erased, piece by piece. In the midst of all this, I found a strange kind of peace. Not happiness, mind you, but a sense of closure. It was over. The lies, the deceit, all of it. I was ready to start over, even if it meant rebuilding from scratch. But my wife, she was just beginning to face the consequences of her choices. And let me tell you, they were just starting to pile up. The day after the supermarket showdown, my phone started buzzing nonstop. Texts, calls, even emails. Everyone I knew was reaching out. Sorry to hear what happened, they'd say, or if you need anything, just holler. It was like I'd joined some exclusive club of the wronged and pitted. Not a great feeling, but it's nice knowing people care. Meanwhile, my wife's world was unraveling faster than its sheep sweater. Turns out, her lover boy got canned from his job. Company policy, they said. No messing around with married folks. That's karma for you. Swift and brutal. But wait, it gets better. My wife lost her job too. The scandal, or so they called it, was bad for business. Imagine that. One day you're a respected professional, the next you're out on your ear because of who you're sleeping with. Her parents, who'd always been her rock, turned their backs on her. We can't condone what you've done, her dad said. Her mom just nodded, lips pressed in a thin line. I never thought they'd shut her out, but I guess everyone has their breaking point. The real gut punch came when I found a letter she'd written to him. I'm leaving my husband, it said. We can finally be together. That stung more than anything else. It wasn't just a fling. She was planning to bail on our entire life together. Funny how a piece of paper can hit harder than a right hook. So there I was, Mr. Popular with a phone full of sympathetic messages, and there she was, pretty much exiled from her own life. Her lover was jobless, her parents had disowned her, and her plans for a happy future with Mr. Wonderful were in tatters. It's a strange feeling, watching someone who is your world lose everything they have. Part of me felt vindicated, sure, but there was this other part, a quieter, sadder part, that just felt sorry for her. Not enough to take her back, but enough to wish things had gone differently. You know, they say that when one door closes, another opens. Well, in my case, it felt like a whole bunch of doors slammed shut, while for me, maybe a window cracked open somewhere. It was time to start picking up the pieces for both of us. But for her, it was more like starting from scratch, with a whole lot of baggage to carry. The day I canceled our joint bank accounts and credit cards felt like severing the last tie that bound us. Sure, it left her financially high and dry, but at that point, I was past caring. I remember thinking, let's see how you manage without my money. Her situation went from bad to worse when her lover decided to patch things up with his wife. Can't say I was surprised. Guys like that, they're all about the thrill, not the aftermath. There she was, dumped by her affair partner, cut off by her family, jobless, and now broke. She came to me after that, teary-eyed and desperate. Please, we can work this out, she begged. But I was done. I'd built a wall around my heart, and no amount of crying was going to bring it down. It was harsh, turning her away, but sometimes you've got to be cruel to be kind, right? Next thing I know, her car's being towed away. Missed payments. Another casualty of her new, unraveled life. It was a sad sight, watching her plead with the tow guy. But he just did his job, indifferent to the sob story behind the wheels. With no car, no money, and nowhere else to go, she ended up in some cheap motel on the outskirts of town. I heard about it from a buddy who saw her checking in. Looks like she's hit rock bottom, he said. I didn't want to think about her in that dingy place, but it was hard not to. Every time I passed that motel, a part of me wanted to turn in, see if she was okay. But I'd force myself to drive on. She made her bed, I'd mutter, trying to convince myself I was over it. But deep down, I knew I wasn't. It's tough, you know, trying to hate someone you once loved. Her fall from grace was like watching a house of cards collapse, slow, inevitable, and utterly complete. From a cozy home and a loving husband to a lonely room in a seedy motel, it was a stark reminder of how quickly life can turn on you. In those days, I'd lie awake at night, wrestling with a mix of emotions: anger, betrayal, pity, a messy cocktail that kept me tossing and turning. It's funny how life works. One minute you're planning your future, and the next, you're watching it all go up in flames. Her journey from the suburbs to that motel was more than just a change of address. It was a plunge into a reality she'd never known, a hard lesson about choices and consequences. And me? I was just trying to keep my head above water, navigating my new life without her. But even as I moved forward, part of me couldn't help but look back. Not out of love, maybe not even out of sympathy, but out of a simple, human concern for someone I once shared my life with. It's complicated, entangling your feelings from the wreckage of a broken marriage. Hey everyone, I hope you're enjoying the video so far. If you do, please take a moment to hit that like button. It really helps me out and lets me know you appreciate the content. Also, if you haven't already, consider subscribing to the channel. Subscribing is a great way to stay updated with all the latest videos and to be part of our growing community. It's quick, it's free, and it ensures you won't miss out on any upcoming content. So go ahead, smash that like button and hit subscribe. Your support means a lot and keeps this channel going. Thanks for watching. Life's funny, Just when you think you're down for the count, it throws you a lifeline. That's what happened with me and my job. Amidst all the personal chaos, my boss calls me in and bam, promotion. More responsibilities, better pay. It felt like a nod from the universe, saying, hey, you're gonna be all right. Meanwhile, my ex-wife's world kept shrinking. Her best friend, who'd been her confidant for years, finally had enough. I can't support what you did, she told her, and just like that, another pillar in my ex's life crumbled. It's one thing losing your husband and family, but losing your best friend? That's a whole other level of loneliness. I heard she tried to start some online business, selling handmade jewelry or something. But it tanked before it even got off the ground. Not for lack of trying, mind you. She poured her heart into it, but sometimes that's not enough. The world can be unforgiving like that. Then one day, a buddy of mine says he saw her at a fast food joint, hairnet and all, flipping burgers. The fall from a cozy office job to a greasy spoon, it's not something you see every day. It's not that there's anything wrong with honest work, but for her, it was like admitting defeat, Around the same time, I started seeing someone new. She was the complete opposite of my ex, straightforward, no drama, just simple and kind. We met at a local book club. She was into mystery novels, and I guess after all the mysteries in my own life, it felt right. It was nice, feeling that connection again, like stepping into the sun after a long night. Dating her was a breath of fresh air. No secrets, no lies, just two people enjoying each other's company. It made me realize how strained things had been with my ex, even before everything went down. This new relationship felt easy, natural. It was a reminder that not everything in life has to be a struggle. Seeing my ex in that fast food uniform, though, it gave me a weird mix of feelings. Part of me felt sorry for her. Nobody dreams of ending up like that. But another part, maybe the less generous part, thought, well, you made your bed. My life was moving forward, new job, new relationship, new beginnings. It was like I'd stepped onto a new path, leaving the wreckage behind. But every now and then, I'd catch myself wondering about her, about how different our lives had become. It's strange, how life can take two people who were once so close and send them spinning into entirely different orbits. I was on the rise, finding new love, new success. She was just trying to keep her head above water, one burger flip at a time. In the grand scheme of things, it was a chapter of new beginnings for me and harsh realities for her. A tale of two paths diverging from the same broken road. And as much as I wanted to focus on my own journey, part of me couldn't help but look back at hers, if only just to see how far we'd both come. So, things got worse before they got better. Word around town was that my ex-wife's health was taking a nosedive. Stress, they said, and who could blame her? Living in that dingy motel, working a dead-end job, her world had turned upside down. I'd see her around, looking thinner, eyes hollow. It was like watching someone fade away in slow motion. Then one day, I get this letter. Her handwriting on the envelope, shaky and uncertain. I knew it was some sort of apology, a plea maybe, but I couldn't bring myself to open it. Instead, I just dropped it back in the mailbox, returned to sender. Harsh, maybe, but I had to draw the line somewhere. Around the same time, her folks packed up and left town. Sold their house, the one she grew up in, and moved out of state. Didn't even say goodbye to her, or so I heard. That had to sting, being abandoned by the people who raised you. It's one thing feeling like the world's against you, but your own parents? That's a whole other kind of hurt. In court, when it came to alimony, I put my foot down. She cheated, I told the judge. Why should I pay for her mistakes? The judge agreed, and just like that, I was off the hook. But walking out of that courtroom, it wasn't victory I felt. It was more like relief. Relief that this chapter was finally closing. The final blow for her came when she was evicted from the motel. Missed payments, they said. I remember driving past, seeing her sitting on the curb, surrounded by a few bags of belongings. It was a pitiful sight, really. There she was, the woman I once promised to spend my life with nowhere to go, no one to turn to. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a pang of something, guilt, maybe, or pity. But I had my own life to live. I'd moved on, found peace, and there was no going back to that mess. Her life, though, seemed to be spiraling out of control. From a comfortable home to a roadside curb, it was a stark reminder of how quickly fortunes can change. And as much as I wanted to wash my hands of her and the whole sorry saga, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of something. Not love, not anymore, but maybe just a trace of the connection we once had. It's funny how life works. One minute you're on top of the world, and the next, you're scraping rock bottom. My ex-wife's downfall was a testament to that. A tale of loss, regret, and the consequences of choices made. Seeing her like that, all alone, it made me think about how fragile it all is. Our lives, our relationships, our sanity. One wrong turn, and it can all come crashing down. So, as I drove past her that day, part of me wanted to stop, to offer some kind of help. But I kept driving, telling myself it was for the best. After all, some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. And sometimes, the only way forward is to leave the past behind, no matter how hard it might be. Life's a roller coaster, ain't it? Just when you think you've got it all figured out, it throws you a curveball. Take this one time. A buddy of mine says, "Hey, your ex has been asking about you." I just shrugged it off. Old news, water under the bridge. Meanwhile, I was busy putting a ring on the finger of my new girl. Yeah. I popped the question, and she said yes. It felt good, moving on, starting fresh. She was everything my ex wasn't, honest, straightforward, real. Putting that engagement ring on her was like saying, that part of my life? It's over. But life has a way of reminding you of things you'd rather forget. Like when I heard my ex ended up in the hospital. Exhaustion and malnutrition, they said. The news hit me weird. Sure, we were done and dusted, but once upon a time, she was my everything. It's hard to hear something like that and not feel a thing. She tried reaching out to her brother too, tried to patch things up. But he wasn't having any of it. Can't blame him, really. She'd burned a lot of bridges, and some just don't get rebuilt. Her own brother turning his back on her, that's gotta hurt, no matter how tough you are. Then I hear she's been seen wandering around town, looking all lost and out of sorts. It's a small place, our town, so news travels fast. People said she looked like a ghost, just aimlessly walking the streets. I pictured her there, all alone, and part of me wanted to do something, anything. But what can you do, right? It's strange how life works. There I was, celebrating my new engagement, and there she was, at what seemed like the lowest point of her life. I'd moved on, but she was stuck, trapped in this downward spiral. Sometimes, late at night, I'd think about her. Not in a longing way, but more like wondering how things got so messed up. We'd started with such high hopes, and now, It was like we were living in two different worlds. I'd lie there next to my fiancé, feeling her warmth, her steady breathing, and I'd feel grateful. Grateful for a second chance at happiness, for finding someone who made me believe in love again. But there was always this niggling thought in the back of my mind about my ex. Where did she go wrong? Was there something I could have done differently? Questions with no answers, I guess. Life's not always fair, and it sure isn't kind. You can find happiness one moment and lose everything the next. Seeing my ex so broken, so lost, it was a reminder of that. A reminder to hold on to what you've got, to cherish it, because you never know when it might slip away. So, as I planned my future with my fiancé, part of me kept looking back at the past, at the life I'd left behind. Not with regret, but with a sort of melancholy understanding that sometimes life just takes you places you never expected to go. So there I was, planning a wedding, while my ex-wife's life was unraveling faster than a ball of yarn. It's funny how life splits paths. One day you're sharing dreams, the next you're strangers with nothing in common but memories. I heard through the grapevine that some local charity offered to help her out. But pride's a funny thing, it can make you turn down even a helping hand. She said no, preferring to struggle on her own. Made me think of the woman I once knew, always too stubborn for her own good. Her mental state, though, that was another story. People started noticing, talking. They'd see her in town, muttering to herself, lost in her own world. It was sad, really. You never want to see someone you once loved fall apart like that. Then one day, word got around that she'd been arrested for shoplifting. Food, basic stuff, nothing fancy. It was a shock, sure, but more than that, it was a wake-up call. This was serious. She wasn't just down on her luck, she was desperate. In jail, she bumped into an old friend of hers, someone who'd also seen better days. This friend, she'd had her own fall from grace, a story of lost jobs and bad decisions. They were like two peas in a pod, both trying to make sense of where it all went wrong. I thought about her a lot in those days. Not with anger or resentment, but with a sort of detached sadness. It's weird, feeling sorry for someone you once thought you'd spend your whole life with. I'd look at my fiancé, so full of life and hope, and then I'd think of my ex, her life in tatters. It was like a tale of two cities, one bathed in sunlight, the other shrouded in shadows. Sometimes I'd catch myself wondering if there was something I could have done to stop her spiral. But then I'd shake it off. You can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved, can you? The news of her arrest and her run-in with her old friend made the rounds in our small town. People talked, as they do, but the chatter had changed. It wasn't just gossip anymore, it was concern, pity even. I remember thinking about how quickly life can change. One bad decision, one wrong turn, and everything you've worked for can come crashing down. It's a humbling thought, makes you appreciate what you have. So, as I went about my day, picking out wedding invitations, tasting cakes, I couldn't help but spare a thought for my ex. Once part of my life, now just a shadowy figure on the periphery, a reminder of how unpredictable and harsh this world can be. Life's a journey, they say, full of ups and downs. My path was heading upwards, towards a new beginning, while hers seemed to be a never-ending descent. But in the end, we all walk our own roads, carrying our burdens, facing our demons. And sometimes, all you can do is hope that the road eventually leads you back into the light. The thing about hitting rock bottom is sometimes, just when you think things can't get any worse, life proves you wrong. That's what happened to my ex-wife. Fresh out of jail, she found herself backstabbed by the one friend she thought she had left. This so-called friend, who'd also been in the gutter, saw an opportunity and took it. Used my ex for some quick cash, then kicked her to the curb. Talk about a low blow. So there she was, no roof over her head, no one to turn to. The streets became her home. I saw her once, huddled under a pile of newspapers in the park. It was a cold, damp morning, and there she was, trying to keep warm. My heart sank. No matter what had gone down between us, no one deserves that. A guy who used to work with her spotted her too. Tried to offer help, maybe a place to stay or some work. but pride, or maybe shame, got the better of her. She turned him down flat, said she'd sort herself out. That's the thing about pride, it can keep you warm, but it sure won't put a roof over your head. I heard through the grapevine that she started keeping a journal, writing down her thoughts, her regrets. Maybe it was therapeutic, a way to make sense of the mess her life had become. I wondered what she wrote about. Our life together, where things went wrong, the spiral that took her from a warm bed to a cold park bench. It's strange, you know. There you are, planning a wedding, tasting cakes, picking out suits, and there's this person you once shared everything with, out there somewhere, writing in a journal about where it all went wrong. I'd think about her at night sometimes, lying in bed next to my fiancé. I'd wonder if she was safe, if she was warm, if she had enough to eat. It's funny how someone can be out of your life, but never really out of your thoughts. The journal thing stuck with me. It was like she was trying to piece herself back together, one word at a time. I respected that. It takes guts to look at yourself, warts and all, and try to learn from it. So, as I moved forward with my life, I couldn't help but look back at hers. It was like a cautionary tale, a reminder of how fragile it all is. You're one decision, one mistake away from a completely different life. Her downfall was a mix of bad choices and bad luck. And as much as I wanted to shut that chapter of my life for good, I couldn't help but feel a pang of something. Not love, not anymore, but a kind of sad acknowledgement of the shared history that once was. Life's a journey, all right. One person's path leads to happiness, another's to a park bench. And all you can do is hope that somewhere along the way, they find their way back to a better road. Just when you think things can't get any worse, they do. That's what happened to my ex. Her journal, the one thing she clung to, was swiped right out of her hands by a homeless guy. Can you imagine? That journal was her lifeline, where she spilled her heart out, and just like that, it was gone. She was devastated, said it felt like losing a part of herself. That's the thing about hitting rock bottom, even the ground beneath you can crumble. She decided to leave town after that, start fresh somewhere else. But starting over's tough when you've got no one to lean on. She struggled, scraping by on odd jobs, living hand to mouth. It's a hard world out there, especially when you're trying to rebuild from scratch. Meanwhile, life was good on my end. Wedding plans were coming along, and every day was brighter than the last. I heard through the grapevine that she'd been asking about me, about our old life. But honestly, I was too caught up in my own happiness to give it much thought. I'd moved on, and looking back just didn't seem worth it. Then, fate played a cruel hand. We bumped into each other at a local event. There I was, laughing with my fiancé, and there she was, a ghost from the past. Our eyes met, and for a second, it was like the whole world stopped. I saw the recognition, the pain, the nostalgia in her eyes. And then she looked away, lost in the crowd. The last I heard of her, she was seen walking alone as the first snow of the season began to fall. They said she looked like a shadow of her former self, wandering aimlessly, as if she didn't quite belong anywhere anymore. That image stuck with me, her, walking away in the falling snow. It was poetic in a sad sort of way, like a scene from a movie. The snow, pure and untouched, contrasting with the harsh reality of her life. It made me think, about how life can take such unexpected turns. There I was, gearing up for a new chapter, full of hope and happiness, and there she was, lost in a world that had moved on without her. It's weird how two lives that were once so intertwined can diverge so drastically. I found myself hoping that she'd find some peace, some corner of the world where she could start again, really start again. But as I watched her disappear into the snow, I knew some stories don't have happy endings. Sometimes, all you're left with are memories and what could have beens. And sometimes, all you can do is keep walking, one foot in front of the other, through the snow and into. I never thought I'd be the guy eavesdropping on his own wife, but there I was, straining to catch snippets of Emily's hushed phone conversations. It started small, a text here, a whisper there. Just enough to make the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It was a Thursday night, I remember clearly. Emily thought I was asleep, but how could I? My mind was racing, replaying the moments she'd been acting off. She was in the living room, her fingers dancing over her phones during a solo. I couldn't see her face, but I could feel the secrecy in the air. It was thick, almost suffocating. A week later, the plot thickened. She was on a call, voice low, words flowing out in a careful trickle. I was in the hallway, just out of sight. "I can't talk now. He's here," she whispered, sending a chill down my spine. Who was she talking to? Why the secrecy? It was like living in a bad spy movie. I couldn't take it anymore. I confronted her the next day, my voice more of a plea than an accusation. "Emily, is everything okay? You've been different." Her eyes darted away before meeting mine, a rehearsed smile plastering her face. "It's just work stress, John. You know how it gets." But the unease in her voice, the slight tremor, told a different story. I wanted to believe her. God, I did. But doubt is like a seed. Once planted, it grows, creeping into every crevice of your mind. Emily's late-night texts, her hushed calls, they were watering that seed, and I was helpless to stop it. There was no going back now. I was caught in the web of suspicion, every action of Emily's scrutinized under the lens of my doubts. The woman I loved, the woman I trusted, had become a stranger, and I was left grappling with the shadows of uncertainty. It was just the beginning, the first chapter of a story I never wanted to be a part of. But there it was, unraveling before me, one suspicion at a time. Man, if you told me a year ago I'd be rummaging through Emily's purse, I'd have laughed in your face. But there I was, heart pounding, hands shaky. It was supposed to be innocent, just looking for her phone to check the weather. But what I found wasn't a phone, it was a crumpled receipt from the Grandview Hotel, dated just last week. Room service and a bottle of champagne. My mind raced. She told me she was with her sister that night. I needed to talk to someone, get this heavy load off my chest. So, I called Mike, my buddy since college. We met at our usual spot, a dingy little bar downtown. "Mike, I think Emily's seeing someone else," I blurted out, not even waiting for him to sit down. He looked at me, his face a mix of shock and concern. "John, are you sure? Maybe it's a misunderstanding," but the look in my eyes told him everything. "Okay, man, what do you want to do?" I had already made up my mind. I needed to know the truth. That evening, I told Emily I was working late, a lie to uncover another. I parked my car down the street, my heart a ticking time bomb. There she was, stepping out, looking around nervously before heading down the street. I followed at a distance, every step echoing in my head. She led me to a quaint Italian restaurant. I watched from afar as she met with a guy tall, dark-haired, definitely not her sister. They seemed close, too close. My stomach churned as they laughed, his hand touching hers across the table. It was like watching a movie, except I was the guy who didn't see the plot twist coming. The evening dragged on, each minute a dagger in my heart. Finally, they left, heading in opposite directions. I drove home, a storm brewing inside me. The evidence was right there, yet part of me still hoped it was all a big misunderstanding. But deep down I knew. I just didn't want to face it yet. That night, as Emily slipped into bed, whispering a tired, "I love you," I felt a distance wider than any ocean. The truth was lurking in the shadows, waiting to shatter everything. And I was just not ready to confront it yet. You know that feeling when your world flips upside down? Yeah, I got a first-hand experience of that. It was a Tuesday, a nothing special kind of day, or so I thought. I was walking past this cafe, the one Emily loves for their artisanal coffee. And there she was, sitting by the window. Not alone, though. With her was this guy, someone I'd never seen before. I should have walked away, I guess. But I couldn't. It was like my feet had a mind of their own. So, I stood there, outside, looking in. They were laughing, her hand casually touching his. It was like a punch to the gut. I mean, we had our issues, but this? I never saw it coming. I stumbled away, each step heavier than the last. The images from the cafe played on a loop in my head. Emily, my Emily, with another guy. It felt unreal, like a bad dream. But the ache in my heart, that was as real as it gets. The rest of the day was a blur. I tried to make sense of it all, but nothing added up. By the time I got home, I was a mess, a whirlwind of hurt and anger. Emily was there, cooking dinner, acting like everything was normal. I couldn't take it. "Who is he, Emily?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She froze, spoon midair. The look on her face said it all, even before she spoke. "John, I can explain." But what followed wasn't an explanation, not really. It was a confession. She met him a few months back. Things got out of hand. She never meant to hurt me. I listened, or at least I tried to. But her words were muffled by the sound of my breaking heart. Betrayal is a strange thing. It doesn't just hurt, it hollows you out, leaves you empty. We talked for hours, or maybe it was minutes. Time didn't make sense anymore. She cried, said she was sorry, that it was a mistake. Part of me wanted to scream, to lash out. But I just sat there, numb. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. My mind was a battlefield, love and hurt colliding. I thought I knew Emily, thought our love was solid. But as I lay there, next to her yet miles apart, I realized I was living a lie. The truth? It was as bitter as it gets. And I was just starting to taste it. The days after the confession were like walking through a fog. Emily, she was trying hard, you know. Her eyes were constantly filled with this plea for forgiveness. She'd say things like, "John, I'll do anything to fix this." And a part of me, a big part, wanted to believe her, to wipe the slate clean. So, we made this pact, a sort of last-ditch effort to salvage what was left of us. She cut all ties with the guy, and well, I tried to bury the hurt. We started going to this marriage counselor, Dr. Lewis. The office was this cozy little room, filled with books and those cliché motivational posters. Dr. Lewis was okay, I guess. He had this calm way of talking, like every word was measured. Communication is key, he'd say. And we'd talk, Emily and I, about everything. The affair, our feelings, the distance that had crept into our marriage. For a while, it seemed to work. We'd have these moments, brief flashes where it felt like the old times. Emily would laugh at my jokes, and I'd catch myself looking at her, really looking, and seeing the woman I fell in love with. But, you know, trust is a fragile thing. Once it's broken, it's like trying to glue back a shattered vase. You can put the pieces together, but the cracks, they're always there. And no matter how much I wanted to, those cracks in our marriage, they never really went away. There were nights when I'd lie awake, watching her sleep, and my mind would race back to that cafe, to the lies. I hated it, hated that I couldn't get past it. Emily sensed it too. Sometimes, she'd catch me lost in thought and her face would fall, knowing where my mind was. Despite our best efforts, something fundamental had shifted between us. The counseling, the talks, they were like band-aids on a wound too deep. I loved her, I really did. But love, it turns out, isn't always enough. Not when the trust that's supposed to hold it together is crumbling. So, there we were, stuck in this limbo. Two people, desperately trying to hold on to something that was slipping through our fingers. And the worst part? I wasn't sure if I wanted to hold on anymore. Life has a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect it. Just when I thought our marriage was hanging by a thread, Emily dropped the bombshell she was pregnant. For a moment, everything else seemed to fade away. The betrayal, the hurt, all of it took a backseat. I remember holding her, feeling this mix of disbelief and pure joy. Maybe, just maybe, this was what we needed to turn things around. The next few months were a whirlwind. We were getting ready for the baby, painting the nursery, buying all sorts of tiny clothes. Seeing Emily with that growing bump, I felt something I hadn't in a long time hoped. I talked to the baby, my hands on her belly, feeling those little kicks. It was surreal, like being part of a miracle. But as the due date got closer, the old demons started creeping back in. Lying in bed at night, I'd find myself wrestling with this gnawing doubt. Whose child was it? The question haunted me, echoing in my head. I loved that baby already, but I needed to know the truth. So, I did something I never thought I'd do. A week after our baby was born, a beautiful little girl with Emily's eyes, I ordered a DNA paternity test. It felt like betrayal, doing it behind Emily's back. But the uncertainty was eating me alive. I remember the day I sent off those samples like it was yesterday. My hands were trembling, heart pounding in my chest. It wasn't just a test, it was the deciding factor of my future. My family's future. The weight was agonizing. Every time I looked at Emily, or held my daughter, I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. The possibilities played over and over in my mind. What if she's mine? What if she's not? Then the results came. I opened the email, my breath caught in my throat. And there it was, black on white. I wasn't the father. The room spun around me, and I felt like I was falling into an abyss of hurt and betrayal all over again. I stared at my daughter, sleeping peacefully in her crib. She was innocent in all this, a tiny beacon of joy in a sea of chaos. I loved her, I realize, regardless of what that test said. But could I live with the lie? Could I be the father to a child that wasn't mine, with a woman who had broken my trust? It was the hardest decision I ever had to make. And as I sat there, holding that piece of paper that tore my world apart, I knew things were about to change. All over again. The moment I opened that envelope, it was like time stood still. Not the father. Those three words echoed in my head, a deafening silence that drowned out everything else. I sat there, the paper trembling in my hands, feeling like my entire world had just crumbled into dust. I couldn't think, couldn't breathe. My daughter, the little girl I had been talking to every night, dreaming of teaching her to ride a bike, to swim. She wasn't mine. The pain was indescribable, a mix of betrayal, loss, and this deep, hollow emptiness. I must have sat there for hours, just staring at those words. It was Emily who found me, her face lighting up when she saw me holding the envelope. So, you did the test, she said, a cautious hope in her voice. But when she saw my face, her smile faded. John, what? What does it say? The words came out in a whisper, my voice a stranger to my own ears. I'm not the father, Em. Her reaction was a mix of shock, guilt, and this deep sorrow. She reached for me, but I couldn't bear her touch. Not then. The room felt stifling, the walls closing in on me. I needed answers, the whole truth. Who is he, Emily? Who's the father? I asked, my voice steadier now, but with a sharp edge of pain. She broke down, tears streaming down her face. It was just one time a mistake. His name is Mark, from work. I never meant for this to happen, John. I swear I never meant to hurt you. Her words, her sobs, they were like a distant storm. I could see her, hear her, but I was detached, lost in a sea of betrayal. How, Emily, how could you do this to us? We talked, or rather, she talked, and I listened. The story of her affair unfolded, each word another weight on my already sinking heart. She spoke of loneliness, confusion, a moment of weakness. But all I could hear was the lie my life had become. After she finished, the silence was overwhelming. There was nothing left to say, no words to fix the broken pieces scattered around us. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the woman I had loved, trusted, and built a life with. But she was a stranger now, her face a map of roads I no longer recognized. I walked out of that room, out of the house, not knowing where I was going. I just needed to breathe, to feel something other than the crushing weight of my shattered world. The night air was cool against my skin, a stark contrast to the burning chaos inside me. As I wandered the empty streets, the reality of it all began to sink in. My marriage, my family, my future, everything had changed in the span of a single evening. And as the stars blinked down at me, indifferent to the turmoil below, I realized it was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. A chapter one never wanted, never asked for, but was thrust upon me all the same. I never thought I'd be sitting in a lawyer's office discussing how to end my marriage. Life's funny that way, throwing you into situations you swore you'd never be in. But after everything that happened, staying with Emily wasn't an option anymore. I needed to move on, for my own sanity. The lawyer's office was this cold, impersonal space, all sharp angles and sterile colors. It felt fitting, considering the nature of my visit. Mr. Henderson, the lawyer, was a no-nonsense kind of guy. He laid out the papers in front of me, his voice steady and impersonal. We'll need to decide on how to handle the custody arrangements, assets, all of that. Custody. The word hit me like a truck. My daughter, well, not biologically mine, but mine in every way that counted what would happen to her. I was torn between the hurt and the love I felt for that little girl. I want what's best for her, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Henderson nodded, jotting down notes. We went over everything, the house, our savings, the car. It felt surreal, dividing up the life we built together into columns and numbers. Each item we listed was a memory, a piece of a dream that I once thought would last a lifetime. Drafting the divorce papers was a lengthy process. Mr. Henderson explained each clause, but I was only half listening. My mind kept drifting back to Emily, to the way things used to be. But every time I thought of the good times, the betrayal sneaked in, tainting those memories. By the time I left the office, the papers were ready for Emily to sign. I felt a strange mixture of relief and profound sadness. A part of me still loved her, despite everything. But another part, the part that was hurt and betrayed, knew this was the only way forward. The drive home was a blur. I kept thinking about how to tell Emily, how to start this final, painful conversation. I knew it would break her, but the trust between us was already shattered beyond repair. When I got home, Emily was in the kitchen. She looked up, her eyes searching mine for a sign, any sign, of what was coming. I took a deep breath and handed her the envelope. "I've filed for divorce," I said. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and final. Her reaction was a mix of tears and pleas. "John, we can work this out," she sobbed. But I was past the point of no return. I had given her a chance, and she had broken everything we had. I can't, I just can't do this anymore. That night, I slept in the guest room, the sound of her crying echoing through the walls. It was the hardest night of my life, letting go of the woman I loved, the life I thought we had. But sometimes, the hardest decisions are the ones that are most necessary. As I lay there, staring at the ceiling, I realized this was just a beginning. The beginning of a long, hard journey of healing and finding myself again. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, there was a light at the end of this dark tunnel. I remember staring at the divorce papers on the kitchen counter, feeling like I was standing at the edge of a cliff. Part of me wanted to just walk away, forget all about them. Emily was still Emily, the woman I'd loved for so long. It wasn't easy, trying to let go of that. But then, there were the lies, the betrayal. It felt like a wound that just wouldn't heal. Every time I looked at her, I remembered the cafe, the DNA test, all of it. It was like living with a ghost, a constant reminder of what we had lost. I was lost in these thoughts when Emily walked in. She had this hopeful look in her eyes, the same look she'd had when we first met. It tore at me, seeing her like this, knowing what I had to do. "John, can we talk?" she asked, her voice trembling. I just snapped. All the pain and anger that I'd been bottling up came pouring out. "Talk, now you want to talk." I picked up the papers and threw them at her, my heart pounding in my chest. "Here, talk about this." The papers fluttered to the floor, and I saw the shock in her eyes. It was like I had hit her, not with my hands, but with the weight of all our broken dreams. "John, please," she whispered, picking up the papers. "Don't do this. We can still fix this." I wanted to believe her. God, I did. But how could we fix something so shattered? Fix this? Emily, look at us. We're a mess. You lied to me, betrayed me. How can we build anything on that? She was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "I made a mistake. I'm so sorry, John. I never wanted to hurt you." Her words, they should have been a balm, but they just felt like salt on an open wound. We stood there, in the middle of our kitchen, surrounded by memories of a happier time. But it was like we were in two different worlds. I couldn't cross back into hers, not after everything. I told her then, told her it was over. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. She begged, pleaded for another chance, but I was empty, all my forgiveness spent. I walked out of that kitchen, out of the life we had built together. The sound of her crying followed me, a haunting melody of what we used to be. I knew I was doing the right thing, but damn, it didn't make it any easier. That night, I sat alone in my living room. The silence was deafening, the absence of her presence like a void. I had won my freedom, but at what cost? I realized then that this wasn't just the end of our marriage. It was the end of a chapter in my life, a part of me that I'd never get back. And as I sat there, a single man in a house full of ghosts, I knew that the road ahead was going to be a long one. But for the first time in a long while, it was a road that I chose for myself. It was the morning after the confrontation, and the house was silent, the kind of silence that screams. I was sitting at the kitchen table, the divorce papers lying there like a final verdict. My mind was made up, but my heart? That was a different story. Packing up my life into boxes felt surreal. Each item I touched was a memory, a piece of a life that was no longer mine. The photo from our honeymoon in Greece, the coffee mug I got her for our first anniversary, they all went into the box, a tapestry of the past. I moved methodically, almost robotically. It was easier that way, not to think too much, not to let the memories seep in. But they did anyway. With every book, every piece of clothing, a part of me wanted to scream, to throw it all away and pretend none of this was happening. But it was happening. The ring on my finger felt heavy, a symbol of a promise broken. I took it off, placing it gently on the dresser. That small action felt like lifting 100-pound weight off my chest. Emily was at her sister's. I was grateful for the space. Saying goodbye would have been too hard for both of us. I left her a note, simple words, but it was all I could muster. I wish things were different. Take care, John. What else was there to say? The car was packed, a life condensed into a few boxes and suitcases. I took one last look at the house, our house. It was just a building now, the life we built inside it already fading into memory. As I drove away, the neighborhood blurred past me. I wasn't just leaving a house. I was leaving a chapter of my life behind. It was scary, starting over. But there was also this sense of freedom, a weightlessness. I had no idea where I was going, but for the first time in a long time, the uncertainty didn't scare me. I had a lot of healing to do. The wounds were still fresh, and I knew they wouldn't heal overnight. But I also knew I'd get there, one step at a time. Life had thrown me a curveball, but I was still standing. Broken, yes, but not defeated. The road stretched out in front of me, an open book waiting to be written. I had plans, vague ideas about what I wanted to do, places I wanted to see. But more than that, I wanted to find myself again, the man I was before all the hurt and betrayal. As the miles rolled by, I felt something stir inside me, a flicker of hope, a spark. It was going to be a long journey, but I was ready for it. Ready to face whatever came my way, ready to build a new life, a life where I was the author of my own story. And so, with the sun setting in my rearview mirror, I drove towards the horizon, towards a new beginning. It was time to turn the page, to start a new chapter. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was mine, and